All right, thank you guys so much for having us. We're excited to be here to talk about kind of the evolution and history of stormwater management in Portland. So here's an overview of the presentation. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the context of stormwater in Portland, discuss our storm systems, and how our local geology and development history kind of led to kind of those systems and where they're at. I'm going to talk about kind of go through the timeline and kind of important milestones from regulatory drivers, talking about our city capital investments, and then the city programs and policies that we've implemented around stormwater. I'm going to dive into a few case studies about GSI and private property and how we work with private property on stormwater. And then Tim's going to give a technical overview talking about our GSI design evolution, kind of the pilot projects, monitoring, and how we've changed our designs over time. And then talk a little bit of what we've learned about O&M and some of the lessons learned there. So just for a little orientation, Portland is located in the Pacific Northwest. We at the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We're a river city centered on the Willamette. We have 5 major watersheds within the city: the Columbia Slough watershed, the Willamette River watershed, kind of that's the center of the city, the Johnson Creek watershed, and then our Fano and Tryon creeks. We have 3 different storm systems in Portland, which makes stormwater management here a little bit complicated. Our combined system is sort of in that kind of central part of the city in yellow. We have our UIC area where stormwater is infiltrated kind of deep in the ground in dry wells. That's that teal dashed area in the eastern part of the city. And then we have our separated MS4 system, and that's in the teal. That's mostly on our kind of the west side of town in the hills, and then along our surface waters. So now I'm going to get into Portland's development history and our geology and how those relate to the locations of our storm systems. Portland was platted as a city in 1845, and this map shows our annexation history. And you'll notice here, I just want you to draw your attention to these areas in kind of red, orange, yellow. Those areas were annexed into the city prior to 1930. And those are the parts of the city that really align with our combined sewer system, right? That was developed early in the kind of history of the city, and it serves kind of the central or older parts of Portland. All right, now to back us up a little bit, I'm going to talk about geology. So in the last ice age, 15,000 to 18,000 years ago, ice dams formed in northern Idaho, creating glacial Lake Missoula in western Montana. Over the course of 3,000 years, at least 40 times those ice dams broke and caused massive floods to wash across western Washington. Those floods came down the Columbia River and backed up into the Willamette Valley around Portland. If we're looking at a LiDAR map of Portland, you can see kind of where the materials, all the sediment that those massive floods carried, deposited in the city. So along the northern part of the city and the eastern part of the city, the coarse gravels dropped out. That's where the currents were the fastest. And then as you got closer to the hills that we have on the west side of the town and around the river, the material grades to finer alluvium. Let's see, and then you'll see that the Tualatin Mountains are West Hills. Those in the white, those were not inundated, so that geology is not impacted by the Missoula floods. So here's how that looks on a geologic map. We've got the darker brown here are those coarse gravel deposits from the Missoula floods, and then the lighter tan are those finer grained mixed alluvium. And then our volcanic buttes and the West Hills, the West Hills in particular, are wind-blown loess, which is a kind of clay-like silt that with impermeable layers of clay that's sitting on pretty high bedrock. So these different geologies, geologic formations have very different infiltration rates and runoff characteristics, which really impact our ability to manage stormwater. So those coarse gravels in the east typically have infiltration rates of greater than 10 inches per hour, which is why it's easy for us to infiltrate water into groundwater. The finer grained alluvium around the Willamette River have really mixed infiltration rates between 1 and 10 inches per hour. And then that loess in the hills rarely has infiltration rates above half an inch per hour. And that area is also prone to landslides, which makes it definitely more difficult to manage stormwater. So I just want to throw our storm system map back up again so that you can think about kind of that development history and the geology and see how those things align with where our storm systems are. All right, now I'm going to get into a little bit of a timeline to go through kind of major milestones in stormwater management in Portland. So here's our kind of some early history items. In 1957, we opened our first wastewater treatment plant, and that treated dry weather flows from our combined system. We started charging a stormwater utility fee in 1977 based on impervious area cover, and we still use the same method for that charge today. The 90s and the early 2000s saw a lot of environmental regulations come online. Kind of the most substantial for us was this 1991 consent decree with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to reduce our CSOs substantially by 2001. That consent decree was spurred by a lawsuit filed by citizen activists and environmental groups. And then in 1995, our first MS4 permit was issued. Late 90s, we had several salmonid species in the Columbia and Willamette rivers listed on the endangered species list. 10 miles of the Willamette River were listed as a Superfund site in 2000. And then in 2005, our UIC system had its first water pollution control facility permit issued, and that brought our entire storm system under kind of a regulatory permit. So now I'm going to talk about kind of our high-level city goals and strategies for these systems. In the combined system, our high-level goals really are to reduce CSOs and mitigate basement sewer backups. In the separated systems, right, we're looking to protect surface and groundwater. So we have a number of strategies to accomplish these goals: capital projects, partnerships with community, and then regulations and policies. So I'm going to kind of go over kind of some major milestones in kind of these buckets. So spurred by that consent decree to reduce CSOs, we started looking into green infrastructure in the 90s. We piloted our first early vegetated stormwater facilities in 1993. We launched the downspout disconnection program in 1996. I'm going to talk more about that later. We started the Green Streets pilot program, sustainable stormwater program, to advance, to partner with our Transportation Bureau and advance green infrastructure. In 2008, Council passed a Gray to Green initiative, which allocated $55 million over 5 years to advance green infrastructure. And in 2010, we started our private property retrofit program. A lot of these we're going to go into more detail later, so you'll get a little bit more information about those. So looking at our investments in green infrastructure, this map shows our current distribution of public stormwater facilities, particularly our green streets, which are these street side planters in that photo in the upper right-hand corner. We currently have just over 2,600 of them. And then this table shows kind of the counts of some of the other facility types that we have: swales, regional wetlands and ponds, and manufactured treatment technologies that do water quality treatment. So along with that kind of the distributed green infrastructure, we made other major capital investments to reduce CSOs. We constructed this project kind of overall was the largest infrastructure project in Portland history at the time at $1.4 billion. We constructed 3 big pipes, one along the Columbia Slough, and then ones on either side of the Willamette River. And then we worked on these cornerstone projects to remove stormwater from the system through the downspout disconnection program, a big stream diversion project, installing 3,000 additional stormwater sumps, UICs. That's where you see that UIC area overlapping with the combined system in our map. And then some targeted sewer separation projects. So in total, all of that work significantly reduced our combined sewer overflows from over 50 per year to now well less than 10. And something that's exciting about that is in Portland now we have this culture of swimming in the river in the summertime, which we never had before. This is just, I'm going to show this map. You can see the dark lines are where those CSO tunnels are. And then the other, just if you're curious, the other things on this map are our pump stations and force mains. So then in addition to capital projects, we kind of advanced green infrastructure through implementing policies and programs. So in 1999, we passed our first stormwater management manual, and that requires post-construction stormwater management on private for development projects. The city passed the green building policy in 2001, and that applied to city projects and required of green building practices, including the promotion of green roofs. In 2006, we launched our Clean River Rewards program, which provides bill discounts for managing stormwater. And then in 2018, the city established this is a new tax that the city established. It's the newest tax we've passed in a long time. It creates a fund to reduce carbon and help adapt to climate change. And that some of that money can be spent on investments in green infrastructure, including community grants and supporting our green infrastructure projects and maintenance. All right, so now I'm going to go through some of how we rely on private property to kind of meet our stormwater goals. We do this through a couple of different strategies, partnerships, incentives, and regulations. Just to note, this picture is one of our earliest stormwater retrofits. We worked with the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, which is a kind of science museum here, to retrofit swales into their parking lot. Okay, so I mentioned the downspout disconnection program a couple of times, and this program was quite important. It went door to door to work with private property owners to disconnect their downspouts from the combined sewer system and drain water to their yards instead of to our system. It was active from 1996 to 2011. During that time, they disconnected more than 56,000 downspouts, removing 1.2 billion gallons of stormwater per year from the system, and reducing the size of our east side big pipe from 28 feet in diameter to 22 feet in diameter, which resulted in a substantial cost savings. This was a very successful program. We launched the Stormwater Management Manual in 1999. It requires projects that develop or redevelop impervious area to manage stormwater on site. Originally, it applied to sites that develop 500 square feet of impervious area, but we recently raised that threshold to 1,000 square feet with the 2025 edition. It requires on-site infiltration when feasible and includes GSI facility types along with other gray infrastructure options. So I've put 10 years of implementation data up here. This is what we have a solid data for. And during that time, it's applied to over 6,500 projects, managing over 800 acres of impervious area. And then this pie chart shows the distribution of square feet managed by green infrastructure and then gray infrastructure. So green infrastructure is really about 50%. And then 40% is infiltrated into the ground through UICs, and 10% is managed in other gray infrastructure. Kind of to help fund our stormwater and to incentivize on-site management, we have charges for stormwater, and we also charge system development charges. Both of those are based on impervious area cover. In 2006, we launched our Clean River Rewards program. This provides up to a 35% discount on the stormwater portion of your utility bill for sites that manage stormwater on site. 20% of our accounts participate, and about 95% of those are single-family home accounts. The BES Private Property Retrofit Program was launched in 2010. It supports our capital projects for like pipe rehab projects by implementing small-scale stormwater retrofit projects on private property. They partner with willing property owners to install facilities like rain gardens, dry wells, and pervious pavers to infiltrate stormwater on site and reduce flows to our system. That work really helps mitigate local capacity problems like basement sewer backup risk and supports less intrusive and more cost-effective alternatives to our capital improvement projects. So when they can get enough stormwater management on private property, we might be able to line a sewer main for rehab instead of digging it up, upsizing, and replacing it. So to date, this program has installed over 775 projects, managing 26 acres of impervious area. And then this is my last one. We have a grant program called the Percent for Green Grants. It was started in 2008. It offers grants to projects that install green and GSI retrofits in the right-of-way and on private property. Since its start in 2008, it has funded 62 projects, investing nearly $9 million and managing 23 acres of impervious area. The typical projects that this tends to apply to are affordable housing developments, schools, churches, and innovative city projects. One note on this is you have to be doing stormwater management that isn't required, that's already triggered by the stormwater manual. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tim to talk about public right-of-way, GSI, and green streets.
Everybody, I'm going to be talking mostly about our public right-of-way, GSI. Adrienne's given you a little bit of background on some of our private property programs that we've worked on. And I'm going to focus mainly on what we call green streets or ground level green infrastructure that takes runoff from the streets. Of course, there's other things as well. We could talk about eco-roofs and other things too. But this focus on green streets, I think, even though it's a public focus, it certainly has resonance with private property too. Some of the issues and challenges that we have with this public GSI is going to be very similar to what we find in private GSI as well. So they come in all different shapes and sizes, what we call curb extensions, planters, larger basins, swales. And go ahead, Adrienne, next one. And Adrienne showed a slide earlier showing distribution of the public GSI, and so this is similar to that. We're approaching 2,700 facilities now, and you can see they're distributed throughout the city. There are a couple of focused areas. You can see kind of in the center, there is part of our combined sewer system where we put a lot of effort into doing sewer capacity work. And so there's a high density there. And then really anywhere where we had development pressures over the years to meet the requirements of the stormwater management, you'll see facilities as well. So over time, we had a ramp up period. I'll talk a little bit more about these early years. I started kind of in 1997. We started working with private developers on Green Street development. We did pilot projects to gain trust and kind of get buy-in. And then roughly around 2004 manual, we actually put green streets in there. And by 2006, we were really kind of off and running. So you can see we have that little slow ramp up there, pretty steep curve for the next 10 or 11 years after 2006. And then a little bit of a slowdown here starting before the pandemic years for us. There were some reasons for that. And fluctuations year by year there at the graph on the right, just showing the number that were installed in each calendar year. And those things are influenced by a number of factors depending upon what source is generating those green streets. And these are the three main sources that we have, of course, in Bureau of Environmental Services. We have capital system projects that we do in our capital improvement program to improve system efficiency, combined sewer capacity relief, separated storm sewer projects as well. Other public agencies, so our Transportation Bureau may be doing street improvements, and they have requirements for stormwater management under our stormwater management manual, so they'll be putting in facilities as well. Occasionally, we'll have some other large projects. In 2006, there was a large federal housing project that went in, and it had to install over 100 green streets. So we get quite a bit from other public agencies as well. And then, of course, private development, which is subject to the various economic cycles. Sometimes it's really cooking and we get a lot coming through the door, and other times we don't have as many. It's kind of interesting, different slopes in those lines over time, as you see the three different sources and how they add up to our roughly 2,700 streets. But it is interesting. It's pretty close to a three-way split between those three things that we, environmental services, initiated, other agencies in the public sector, and then the private development sector. So in those early years, Adrienne mentioned that we got our first MS4 permit in 1995 and then had our first citywide stormwater management manual in 1999. So in between, we had to figure out what to do to comply with that MS4 permit. And so developers that were building new streets so that they could develop new tax lots were looking to what they needed to do for water quality management if their streets were going to drain into our storm sewer system. And so staff started working with them, trying to figure out what we could do. And then near and dear to my heart, Adrienne mentioned in 2002, we started a sustainable stormwater management program. There was enough momentum behind green infrastructure and interest in it to actually create a dedicated team to work on these projects. And it was a multidisciplinary team that was harvested from various parts of the Bureau, engineer, landscape architects, environmental scientists, politicians, really, to get things moving. And our job was to work on GSI policy, planning, design, construction, what operations and maintenance would look like for these facilities. It would be something different than what we've been doing with gray infrastructure. How would we roll that into the work that we do? And then just how well is it actually performing? We had to convince people that this would work as well. So I particularly was managing the East Side Inflow Control Project. We were looking in the combined sewer system. We have the larger combined sewer overflow program, but we also have local capacity issues that Adrienne mentioned. So looking at ways that we could remove stormwater from the system to relieve the pressure on some of the older, smaller sewers that we had, and figuring out exactly how far we could take that and exactly how much we should invest in that. We got an EPA grant in 2002, Innovative Wet Weather Program. Mostly private property grants, but we also did some public Green Street projects as well. I think there were 6 or so projects that we did, and then a couple of Green Street plans that were done out of that Innovative Wet Weather program as well. And really, the main thing was to continue building relationships. A lot of it had been that before that. Just had very motivated and passionate employees who were talking to people, both outside and inside the city, about green infrastructure, and to continue to do that. What did we need to do to try to advance green infrastructure and make it a tool in our toolbox? And then just piloting things. Again, we had to convince people that this would work. We were fortunate enough that the decision makers at the top of Environmental Services Bureau, the Transportation Bureau, were amenable to trying things out. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we can always take it out. We actually got that response. And I know that's not always a response that people in other jurisdictions get. So we were very fortunate with that. So speaking of the water quality friendly streets, this is working with the developers and that early implementation of our MS4 permit, what they would look like. They were invariably swales, almost always grassy swales. Occasionally you'd get some other types of vegetation in there as well. Rockline swales we would see sometimes too. But in my world, I consider this Green Street #1. I think there were probably a couple of others beforehand, but this one's still there. It's still recognizable as a Green Street. And so I've always touted it as #1. So this is a photo in 2007, about 10 years after it was put in. It looks different every time I see it. Different things are growing in it, but water still goes in and goes down the hill. So it's great. And then the pilot projects, Adrienne actually had a picture of this project up earlier, but this idea of if we're in a more densely developed area and we have things that are built out, where do we put green infrastructure? We don't want to take out the mature trees. Could we bump out into the parking area and create these curb extensions? And so, of course, you lose parking when you do this. This is certainly not something that every neighborhood wants. If you're in a mixed commercial or residential area, parking is at a premium, but in some places you can do this. And it was something that was very successful and a great tool to add in our toolbox. Well, we do have parking. This is a metered parking area downtown. This is on the edge of Portland State University campus downtown here. So we had to maintain parking. We had to have a step out zone for people to get in and out of their cars. How could we integrate green infrastructure facilities in these areas and still manage the flow of people to the sidewalk from to and from the cars? Collaboration with our other bureaus. Our Bureau of Transportation had a mandate to implement Safe Routes to School programs, so getting children and their families to their neighborhood schools, sometimes across fairly busy streets. And so this idea of trying to slow traffic down, shorten crossing distances, make crossings more visible, and then integrating these curb extension bump outs that we were using and using them for stormwater at the same time. So we were able to implement a number of these projects over time. And then kind of, I shouldn't have favorites, but I do. This is my favorite. This was certainly a key element in my green stormwater infrastructure career. Pretty early on, 2002, we were doing some basin work. We found a pocket that was suffering basement sewer backups. So the combined sewer, when it rains really hard during a thunderstorm type event, sewer pressurizes, backflows up into people's basements. There were 8 or 10 homes that were in danger of backing up. We have a level of service standard of once every 25 years that could happen. They were having it happen every couple of years. So we were kind of shocked that we didn't already know about it. And our bureau director said, you will fix this and you will fix it now. We had been talking about green infrastructure being a tool that we could use in the combined sewer system. And so we were allowed to develop alternatives for green and gray solutions, gray solution being an underground storage pipe. And the costs were comparable. So told, let's try this. If it doesn't work, we'll go to plan B and do the storage pipe, but let's try the green infrastructure first. Next one, Adrienne. There's just a series here. We had some land in just the right place. There was an old vacated right-of-way that had been vacated back to the school that they really weren't using. They would store some materials in it sometime, but it was just where we needed to be. We could get water to it. And so we were able to take over this area and just click through a couple of times there, Adrienne, and construct our rain garden facility here. And its job is to act as a shock absorber. So it would keep the pressurization from that sewer downstream from happening. So the homes you can see there in the box in the north side of the drawing there, the rain garden is over on the left-hand side. It's managing that area in yellow, a little under an acre there. We had a rain gauge on top of the school building, so we could actually do some monitoring here, which was just set up perfectly for this. And I can't say enough about the ability of monitoring to change people's minds. Next one, Adrienne. Yep, back one. There we go. So the job here again is peak flow reduction. So we weren't necessarily looking to remove volume. If we did, that was great. But really what we were trying to do is buffer the intensity of the rainfall events that were causing the sewers to pressurize. So we decided that we needed to stay around a half a CFS, a flow in that pipe to make sure that we didn't have any backups occurring. And that's the red dotted line going across there. And we had the benefit of being able to monitor for about 9 months before we began construction as we went through design and getting the project ready to go. And just in that short period of time, the 4 dots there are above that dashed red line. One of them did create a backup event on that street. And so it was clear that we do have a problem there. We verified there was a problem there, but we already knew that. And then we were able to monitor for many years afterwards. And you can just see after the construction of the rain garden, so many of those dots drop down near zero. Often there isn't flow coming out of the rain garden that absorbs it all. We did have those 2 events that got right up to that, the design flow line there of the half a CFS. One just crept over the top, but it was doing its job perfectly. And despite the fact we had many intense rainfall events, the residents said for sure there were a number of events where they definitely had flooded in the past and they haven't flooded since. So very effective. And we did look at volume as well. We used the rainfall to estimate how much runoff would be coming from that drainage area. That estimate tracked really well with what we metered coming from that area before construction, tens of thousands of cubic feet going in prior to construction. After construction, you can just see that overflow line just drops way down. Of course, during the wintertime, you'll still get some notable overflow, but still much less than before. So overall, about an 84% reduction is what we've estimated from that facility. So just a stellar gold star for this facility. And monitoring in general was just, a major effort for us to convince everyone within the Bureau that this is something we needed to do. We did continuous flow monitoring in some places where it's set up that way, though it's difficult to find those conditions. We could go out and simulate design storms. We could hook up to fire hydrants, so bring out a water truck and simulate flow patterns that echoed our design storms. We could fill up facilities repeatedly and see how fast they drain under different conditions. And we could do it over time. So not only are we looking to see how well is the water going in the facility the way we expect it to, how does it move through the facility? We can watch those things. We can see things that might be cheaper to do than what we ended up doing. And we can look at different seasons. We can look at wet and dry. We have regulatory issues depending upon what season we're in. So how the facilities perform in the summer might be more important than how they perform in the winter. And also this long-term common question we got, okay, fine, they work today, but what about in 5 or 10 years? And when you don't have 5 or 10-year-old facilities, it's hard to answer that question. But as you're building this information over time, you're able to answer those as you go forward. So it really was key. Another key thing was just our internal collaboration. Of course, we're touching certainly environmental services, transportation for sure, but really we end up touching almost every bureau of the city as we do this. So we had to establish a committee called the Stormwater Advisory Team. This was a monthly meeting that we could come to. We could work through any of our planning, design, construction issues. We could make recommendations to senior leadership about standards that should be changed or policies that we needed to develop. And it was worth its weight in gold for sure. You had dedicated staff in each of the bureaus you knew you could talk to if you had a particular issue, and they could get your issue to where it needed to go. But also you had a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I'll touch on a couple of these later, but there are a lot of issues came up that weren't originally on the list. So you'd solve some problems and then you'd create some others that needed to be talked about. Fire trucks, for instance, Fire Bureau access. Hadn't really thought about what happens if Fire Bureau needs to bring their ladder truck out. They need to deploy outriggers to stabilize the truck before they lift the ladder up. What happens if there's a green street where they need to put their outrigger? Is it okay? Can the outrigger actually go there? Things like that came up, which were interesting. We actually went out in the field and had them deploy in one of our green streets to see what would happen. And then just all the external collaboration was so critical. Consultant community here, both in helping us get our work done, but also lessons learned from their other work that they were doing elsewhere in the city and other places, their source of innovation for them. And of course, the academic institutions were really here today because Dr. Poor at the University of Portland had a Fulbright student who wanted to reminisce about the 30 years of GSI history in Portland. And so lo and behold, here we are with a paper, and Portland State, Oregon State as well. Next one, Adrienne. And then regionally too, our neighbors to the east, Tori and Katie, I see you. Huge help, Clean Water Services to our west, Clackamas Water to our south. Other statewide agents, City of Eugene, Springfield, Aqua, Association of Clean Water Agencies, people we could talk to who are going through similar things as we were, and similar regulatory environments too. And then just a huge shout out to our neighbor to the north in Washington. We were able to kind of walk hand in hand with Seattle Public Utilities as we went through the early development of our GSI. And we certainly had some different challenges from each other, but we had a lot we could learn from each other too. And so a close relationship with them. Many others up there, the Washington State University Extension of Puyallup doing a lot of GSI research was super helpful for us. And then it's statewide effort there, not just the cities, Puget Sound Partnership, Washington Department of Transportation, and the Department of Ecology, and everything else, all the other people that we've talked to over the years, whether it's, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, San Francisco, all the places that you go to, the researchers going to the conferences to hear what people are doing. Really something that the exchange is helping to do now, to bring that body of knowledge together. And all of us are maybe in different places in our development of green infrastructure and have different challenges. Different geology, all these different things, different climate, but still to have the ability to share information like this was so important in our early development. So after getting this kind of our feet underneath us and having this structure, it was kind of full speed ahead at this point. We had a city council that was very favorable to green infrastructure. Adrienne mentioned in 2008, they launched the Greater Green Initiative. It was a 5-year initiative. It was green streets, eco-roofs, but also planting street and yard trees, working on fish passage culvert removal in our Crystal Springs watershed and bringing salmon back into that watershed, starting up our invasive species program and control for that, and actually acquiring natural areas that were in still reasonable shape and protecting them as well. And then on the system side, Tabor to the River really began our major push. I had mentioned I was working on that East Side Inflow Control project. What could we do with green infrastructure in our combined sewer system to manage our capacity issues? This was our first major effort to do that. It was our largest combined sewer subbasin in the city. On the right side of the screen is Mount Tabor. On the left side of your screen is just a piece of the Willamette River, hence Tabor to the River. For this watershed, but others know it as Taggart D subbasin, which isn't quite as exciting. Old area, it was sewered with small diameter sewers back when there really wasn't a lot of development out there. But now, of course, there's higher densities, a lot more impervious area than there was before. It's an area of high sewer backup risk, in fact, the highest that we had in the combined sewer system. So when we did our 1999 public facilities plan, it was one of our top priorities. We did our normal analyses of what it would take to do work here. It was pipe only approach, and the price tag was really high for us. We were right in the middle of our CSO program, which cost quite a bit as well. And at the same time, when you just upsize the pipes to pass flow further downstream, it'll eventually end up at the river and actually apply a little more pressure on the combined sewer overflows. So this wasn't something we want to do. So we went on to do at that time. So we hit the pause button. And so because we were doing that facilities planning, system planning, because we had the CSO program running, we'd really made a lot of advances to our asset management system. Models were getting better, computer processing speeds were getting better. We could really leverage all this asset data and GIS data that we had available to us. And we created what we called the explicit model. Every pipe's modeled, every tax lot is modeled. It allowed us to get down to the parking lot, individual parking lots, individual roofs, that individual street inlet. So that really let us look at what GSI could potentially do for us in a variety of settings and mix and match and create alternatives. So we came back with another pre-design doing this and a mixture of green and gray. Hopefully you can see a little bit of the green hatching there, representing areas that are going to be managed by green streets. We ended up installing about 270 green streets in this particular area, so about a tenth of all the green streets in the city. We also, as Adrienne mentioned, we had that private property retrofit program. This is some of their initial targets, was working with some of the targeted property owners that had large roofs, large parking lots. And then just a lot of education and outreach. Why are we putting a green street in front of your house? What are we doing here with our system management? And why did we make this decision? Those types of things were essential, getting the community behind us and getting their understanding. And then the real kicker, of course, is just the business case here too. Because we were using green infrastructure to remove flow from the system, we were reducing that need to cascade the upsizing of our pipes. You upsize those 8 and 10-inch pipes up in the upper reaches of your system. You have to upsize the pipes further down as well to carry all that flow. And in many cases, those pipes still had remaining useful life, maybe 30 or 50 years, and you were going to dig up those pipes and put in bigger ones. So the fact that we were able to avoid that created a huge cost savings. And it's not always this large. We've worked in other basins in the city and didn't see as big of a difference. But in this case, it really was clear that this gray and green merged alternative was the right thing to do. The Green Street Stewards program came around. As more and more green streets started popping up around the city, residents would ask about them. They'd say, "Oh, there's a few pieces of garbage in it. Is it okay if I take them out?" Or, "I'd really like to take care of those plants and see if I can make them healthier or water them if they look like they're dry." And so we decided there are other municipalities that also had started facility adoption programs. Decided we'd try our own starting in 2010 and eventually went citywide in 2012. We provide training tools. What's a weed? What's not a weed? What do we want you to do? What do we not want you to do? That kind of thing. Major things, clearing inlets and outlets. And I'll talk about that here in a minute, how important that is alone. Removing trash, leaves, sediment, and some guidelines for what to do with that when they do. For those that live adjacent to facilities, sometimes they want and are willing to water them. We have a drought-like summer where we don't get much rain at all in July, August, and most of September. So having some help with that from our O&M crews is really helpful. And if we do lose some plants, sometimes they'll have an opinion on what they would like to see replanted in its place, and they can, again, help take care of them and nurse them. And as long as they get approval from us, that's something that they can do. So to date, we have 261 facilities, so almost 1 in 10 of our facilities are stewarded by a member of the public. So moving over to our separated system, this is a recent interagency project that we did. Our Bureau of Transportation had a street development project, street improvement project in Southwest Portland. Water Bureau, Environmental Services, active partners here. It was a major reconfiguring of the roadway. Next one, Adrienne. So this is what it looked like before. So a fairly constrained roadway, pedestrians were kind of walking where they could, creating little goat paths up off the side. We had major biking corridor between two town centers, West Portland and Multnomah Village. That's okay, Adrienne. And then so transportation wanted and the community wanted us to provide a safe walking space, safe biking space. Very constrained roadway. You can see the big retaining walls on both sides. Sometimes there's a big retaining wall going up on one side and a big retaining wall holding up the street on the other. There's a lot of challenges in this particular one. And the constrained right-of-way made us move away from our more traditional distributed Green Street model where we would put a Green Street every block, for instance. And next one, Adrienne, we went to a more regional approach for this one. So the highlighted boxes there on the left-hand side, we went to 4 large regional facilities. And this is something we'll talk about a little bit more later, that there's actually some move to go back towards that. Of course, when I first started my career, ponds and centralized stormwater management were very popular. We moved to a more distributed approach. And now we're kind of coming back to maybe preferring a more regional approach when we can do that. So the top 2 facilities, very large ones at the top, the majority of it, and then a couple of smaller facilities on the southern half, taking the water. And in these cases, they're discharging to local creeks. And so they're providing water quality control and then also slowing the water down to prevent erosion and further landslide risk. So just touching on a few lessons learned, a lot of these are key to O&M, but also to performance as well. This Tim Kurtz has said many times that if the water doesn't go in, nothing else matters, basically. And so I threw it up there. This is like the key thing. We had troubles early on. We would use these precast inlets that you see on the lower left. They're reinforced. They have these jail bars there, just perfect for clogging up and not having things flow through. We wouldn't get the elevations right, the upper right there, not giving enough room for the water to get in, for a little bit of sediment to deposit there. Water doesn't want to turn, so you really got to convince it to turn. And so when we first put in some of our planters with parking step outs, getting it to turn that 90-degree into the grate was hard. Little asphalt berms could sometimes work, but they weren't the best. So these are things that I'm sure you already know, but it's interesting after many decades of doing this, how many times we still talk about this. I think inlets, we kind of are getting to the point where we got this down, but I'm still going to mention it because of all the PTSD that I have from having these conversations. But clearly, straight in whenever you can. Don't make it change direction. Have it be a nice wide opening. If it gets a little bit of debris clogging it, leaves clogging it, still get in. You've got to guide it in, get those gutters depressed, try to make it turn. An elevation drop so that there's some room for sediment and debris to drop out and keep the inlet clear is important. And then for our O&M staff, having an easy place for them to remove that sediment when it's there. So having the concrete splash pad there. I show the beehive there in the lower center. Sometimes the beehives have really narrow openings. The bars are really close together, and definitely like those wider openings better. They will still plaster occasionally, and we still have to do maintenance to keep them clear, but everything we can do to make it a little easier on ourselves. In places where we have high sediment, you have to up the ante. You really have to have sediment control there. We have the slotted forebays. They're not the most attractive thing when they're full of sediment, but they've worked really well, and I think our O&M staff really like them. We'll also occasionally use the sumped catch basins there too to allow debris to drop out before it enters the facility. Under drains. So for our line facilities, how do we let the water out? So traditionally, we had always run a drain pipe the length of the facility and covered it with gravel. So we had gravel running the length of the facility. But we found that the drawdown rates with the soil blends we were using was just too fast. It was whipping through the soil. It would enter the facility, drop down, go through the under drain. So it wasn't really utilizing the full capabilities of the facility. And we were also having a hard time with our plants. We'll talk about soils here in just a second. Trying to get the soils to stay moist enough to support plant growth was difficult. We know we have to establish plants. We do plan on watering them for the first couple of summer seasons. Again, we have those drought periods where we really don't get much rain and need to help them, but found that we really couldn't stop watering them and still have the plants survive. Next one, Adrienne. So we had a project on the Columbia Slough outfall basins. We're doing some stormwater management sediment control there. And so we were installing 32 lined green streets there. So it was a good opportunity for us to try out some different comparisons there and do some detailed analyses. So we looked at a couple different, our traditional soil blend versus a higher fines blend, which we'll talk about more in a second. And then just pulling that under drain back instead of running at the entire length of the facility, something the state of Washington was doing quite a bit of. So really, it's not too surprising. These facilities will do better. If you use a higher fine soil, there's a better chance of moisture retention for plants to do well. And shortening the underdrain definitely is helpful. There's less rock in there. So again, that helps the plants and their moisture capacity and also slows the flow of the water out of the facility. So maybe you can utilize more of that footprint. Won't go into a ton of detail here, but like many back in the early 2000s, we were using just what was generically called a three-way mix. It was basically equal parts soil, sand, and compost. It generally worked really well. However, we did have a couple projects around 2005-06. They were private development projects, and the facilities, they were compacted. Workers were walking through them, staging materials, a number of things, and they didn't drain very well. And so we decided we wanted something a little more conservative. And I think we went a little too conservative. We went to a 5 to 15% passing the 200 sieve, which really allowed sand plus compost to work. We really didn't need a soil fraction in it anymore. And really what that resulted in is really tough conditions for the plants. We had 18 inches of soil in all of our facilities, and having 18 inches of that very sandy mix, it wasn't doing very well. And so we did some studies. We worked with others that were looking at soils, but really didn't have a lot of movement. 2016, we did a little tweaking, adding a little bit of fines, but that really didn't change much. So we really have this 15-year period where we're putting in green streets with very sandy soils, which have some long-term O&M repercussions for us. Finally, a couple of years ago in 2023, we were able to get a high fines blended soil into our specifications that we can use as well. You can see that sandy soil there in the photo in the upper right. And then Adrienne, if you want to go to the next one. So the conclusion was, if we're going to infiltrate, it's okay to still use that standard soil that we were using that's a little sandier. We're just going to use less of it. Instead of 18 inches, we'll do 12, rough up that interface with the native soils, and it'll allow the plants to reach that native soil, which is typically pretty silty and has much better moisture holding capacity, so reducing for irrigation. And then for line facilities, we're going to put more in. We're going to put 24 inches of that higher fines blend soil in. It's going to have better soil moisture retention. It's going to lessen the ability of short circuiting and hopefully reduce our irrigation needs too. So the last couple of slides on challenges moving into the future. I mean, O&M funding is definitely a huge one. We don't keep pace. We know it's something that's important. We make the request, but it's hard. There's a lot of requirements for our rate dollars, and the operating funds are funded by those rate dollars. So affordability to our community is key. It can only go up. Our rates can only go up so much every year, and there are a lot of things to do with that money. So we know we have to do the best we can. So we do try to work with O&M to make design changes that are going to work better for them. Facilities that they spend a lot of their time and effort working on, what can we do to retrofit them to make them better so we can reduce that level? Might have to just adapt our levels of service and start talking about that. We're just not going to be able to visit as often as we were. Are there other funding opportunities? We are looking at ways that capital funds could be used for some activities that we have in maintaining our green streets. And if not, it often can push us in other directions. So looking at more gray options, whether that be sumps or filter vaults or other things, we might look at those instead, depending upon how the business case works out for the alternatives. So on the climate side, we aren't seeing some of the dramatic changes some other parts of the country and the world are seeing, but we are getting hotter in the summer. We're already dry during our summer, and it's getting hotter and drier during our summers. So that idea of what plants are we going to plant and try to nurse through those periods is important. On the precipitation side, some seasonal shifts. It seems like we're getting a little more annual total precipitation on average than we used to. Little bit of shifting maybe from late spring back into the early spring into the winter, but not a lot that would hit you over the head. Peak changes, peak intensity changes aren't totally clear, but we are still looking at this. Has been a long-standing question. What are we doing for climate change? Or what are we going to assume for a future? And we're still looking at that. So our modeling folks are working with the University of Washington on downscaling the climate models. The climate prediction models have 1 hour time steps. Our design storms have 5 to 20-minute design steps. And so how do we use that meaningfully to come up with new models? We have drafted some combined sewer storm system, 2040, 60, 80 storms that we are using in some of our analyses, but they're not official yet. And we haven't really done anything with our separated storm system design storms, but plan to look at those more in the future. I mentioned the kind of move to the from distributed, many small facilities to regional, fewer large facilities. I come from a hydrology background with my schooling, so I cringe a little bit to see this, but I understand there's really good reasons for doing it. The economies of scale, the design, construction, it's just easier if you have the room and can do it. It just makes things simpler than, to build 4 large facilities instead of 100 small ones. It just does. And for O&M, it really makes things easier too. Everything is centralized, sediment control. You have more plant options because you have just a bigger volume to plant in. The travel time between facilities gets cut down where you have to set up and mobilize. And just safety for them. They're usually in a larger facility that can be removed from any traffic hazards or other things that might be there. So there are reasons for us to do that. Pollutants of concern, of course, there always could be other things. 6 ppd is one that's been out there. GSI seems to work pretty well at managing 6 ppd, but are there things that we might want to look at more, especially in places where we have sensitive salmon habitat, PFAS? Is there anything that we need to do with legacy pollutants floating around out there? Hydromodification is in our MS4 permit now, so we focus traditionally on these big events, the 10-year event. Hydromodification is the death by 1,000 cuts. It's the really small events, 6-month, 9-month events, and the cumulative effect of those things. And how will that influence what we need to do with our GSI facility design as we move forward in terms of having multiple orifice designs and things of that sort? And then lastly, just how it's viewed moving forward is still an open question. There's a lot of change going on here in Portland, and I'm sure there are changes going on at other places, but we moved to a new form of government at the beginning of this year. So new structure to our leadership. How are they going to feel about green infrastructure when all things get settled down? We are hiring our new city administrator now, who will take office the 1st of next year. Our bureaus and how they're managed and grouped together is being changed. So we have new people, have new ideas. How is that going to work? Will it help facilitate the bureaus to work together more? That may be true. It may be a positive change, but there's a lot of uncertainty. Both environmental services and our drinking water bureau, Portland Water Bureau, are being consolidated under one director in a one water framework. Right now, it's just that high level coordination. We're not merging our bureaus at this point, but those questions about what does that mean for green stormwater infrastructure moving forward, and then just staff changes over time. I mean, a number of those that were implemental in green infrastructure development have retired now and moved on. We had a project recently with one of my colleagues, and he was having a conversation with our transportation bureau, and these questions that we talked about 15 years ago have come up again. Why do we do this? Why aren't we doing that? And of course, the staff that had been a long time, well, of course, we've had this conversation many times. So this is why we do that. But how is that going to impact us moving forward? Will that cascade as we go forward? How do we document these things and make sure that everybody's on the same page? And I think that's it.